Date today will be July 23rd, 2015. And the time will be approximately 2:05 p.m. And my name is Texas Ranger Patrick O'Connor, Company D, Brownsville, Texas.
I'm Tony Rocha, Texas Ranger out of Orange Office, Company D.
Bobby, if you'll state your name, please.
Yes, my name is Roberto Garcia. I'm with Cleat.
Okay. Rolando, if you don't mind, tell me your name and date of birth, the full name and date of birth.
Rolando Trujillo Jr., date of birth March 3rd, 1992.
March 3rd, 92?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And, of course, this is a reference to an incident that occurred on July 17th, 2015 here in Brownsville. Of course, we spoke about it earlier. It is not an administrative investigation. It is a criminal investigation. Texas Rangers are investigating. What we call this is a voluntary statement. So at any time you feel like you'd like to leave or not answer a question, or you don't want to make a statement, you're not obligated to make a statement at all. And that's why I contacted you direct rather than going through your chain of command. Do you understand that? Have any questions about that? So it's not administrative. It is a criminal investigation. We're just here to collect those facts, put all those facts together in a package, get that over to the DA's office for presentation to the grand jury. Okay, and from what I understand, you have a written statement prepared?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you would, if you'd like to read that.
On July 17, 2015, I responded to 1725 International Boulevard, a 7-Eleven convenience store, in reference to a theft that had just occurred. While I was driving to said location in my clearly marked Brownsville Police Patrol Unit Delta 134, I was awaiting further details on the theft from the communications network or through our mobile data computer. As I drove into the 7-Eleven parking lot, I observed that the clerk was standing in the middle of the parking lot staring at US Highway 77 southbound frontage road and the expressway area. I then drove up next to the clerk, who advised me that a brown sports utility vehicle had taken merchandise from the store without paying and had gotten onto the expressway. The clerk to me appeared to be nervous at the time of my arrival. I also observed that the clerk appeared to be in fear, as he had a fixed stare on the direction of travel of the suspects. Since I was the only officer responding to the theft that had just occurred, the clerk had stated that the suspects had just left location. I then left the location in order to check the area for the suspect vehicle. I also advised the clerk that I was going to check the area before returning to complete the report. I was then advised by the communications network that the suspect vehicle had left on International towards the expressway. I also observed on our MDC that the suspect was wearing a blue shirt and pink shorts. I then crossed International Boulevard and drove onto US Highway 77 southbound frontage on-ramp. As I began to approach the end of US Highway 77 by University Boulevard, I observed that there was only one vehicle at the red light that matched the suspect vehicle description. The other three vehicles at the stoplight were not SUVs and were not the color brown. I observed that there was a brown GMC Jimmy, Texas license plates BMW 0706, in the outermost left turning lane onto East University Boulevard. In the previous 2 weeks, I had remembered that there had been multiple aggravated robberies in the city of Brownsville, where the suspect had used a handgun and fired it during the robberies. And these calls, the suspect vehicle was also a brownish or gold color older model SUV. This information was relayed to the patrol officers during our daily roll call through our daily lookouts. My level of awareness was raised as the vehicle was very similar and was also a suspect to a current theft. I then advised via radio to the communications network that I had visual on a possible suspect vehicle and I was going to conduct a traffic stop on the vehicle. I then waited for the light to turn green before I activated my overhead red and blue lights and emergency siren. As I was waiting for the light to turn green, I observed that the driver of said vehicle was constantly looking in his side view mirror back towards my clearly marked police unit. The light at University Boulevard and US Highway 77 southbound expressway then turned green after a moment. I then proceeded to activate my full front and rear full front and rear emergency lights of the police unit.
Take your time.
In addition to the red and blue emergency lights, I also briefly activated an emergency siren which activates a short but very loud yelp. I then deactivated the emergency siren and left the emergency overhead lights activated on the police unit. As the suspect vehicle turned eastbound onto East University, I turned on the spotlight of the police unit and pointed it directly into the driver's side door and the driver's side view mirror. I observed that the driver was staring back toward my police unit and was talking to someone in the vehicle with him. I was unable to tell how many occupants were in the vehicle at the time due to the dark tint in the rear view window of the suspect's vehicle. I then activated the takedown light functions on the emergency light bar, which sends a solid white beam of light forward. However, this did not allow me better visibility due to the dark tint. As I am continuing to pursue the suspect vehicle, East University was beginning to merge from 3 lanes of eastbound flowing traffic into 2 lanes. I then noticed the driver of the suspect vehicle was still looking back at the police unit, however was refusing to stop or slow down. A normal law-abiding citizen would normally immediately pull over once a police unit activates its emergency lights and sirens. My level of awareness and concern for my safety began to rise as the driver of the suspect vehicle was still refusing to stop his vehicle. I then advised via radio to the communications network that the suspect vehicle was still traveling and was currently passing Valor Street. At this point, the suspect vehicle had already traveled approximately 0.2 miles. The suspect had multiple opportunities to stop the vehicle. The suspect even intentionally passed Valor Street, which was completely out of the way of normal flowing traffic. I then began to use the manual air horn twice on the police unit in order to further assure the suspect vehicle that he had to pull over immediately. The suspect vehicle continued to travel and still refused to stop on East University Boulevard until it started to approach Litska Lane. The suspect vehicle then came to a slowing stop right before Litska Lane. I immediately exited the police unit wearing a full Brownsville police officer uniform and began to approach the suspect vehicle. I immediately used my flashlight in order to start illuminating the interior of the suspect's vehicle. As soon as I was walking up to the rear driver's side door, I observed that the front passenger side door opened rapidly, and a male suspect wearing a blue polo and pink shorts looked in my direction. At this moment, my level of awareness was very high because a normal citizen would not flee from the police, especially in the middle of a traffic stop. I then immediately holstered my flashlight on my duty belt because I believed that the suspect who exited the suspect vehicle was going to attempt to cause harm to this officer. I then noticed that the passenger suspect had lowered his body and I was unable to keep visual on him. This was a very dangerous situation for me, as without visual of the suspect I am unaware if he has a weapon or from which direction he was going to approach me. I was also outnumbered by the suspects since I was the only officer on scene. I immediately advised via portable radio to the communications network that there was a subject running. I then stepped towards the driver's side window in order to obtain a visual of the suspect driver and possibly the suspect passenger. I then observed that the suspect driver was staring at his passenger that was running away. Due to the suspect driver, who was later identified to me as Jose Ramon Rodriguez, date of birth 6/29 of 91, being slightly distracted, I opened the driver's door. I then asked Rodriguez what had happened back there. I was referring to both the theft at the 7-Eleven and why he had not stopped the vehicle. Rodriguez says, "No, yo no sé nada," Spanish for, "No, I do not know anything." However, before I was able to further clarify, I observed that the passenger suspect began running towards an empty field in the direction of Veterans Plaza, located at 2500 East University Boulevard. I then attempted to relay further information to the communications network via portable radio as I was looking at the passenger who was fleeing the traffic stop intentionally. When I reached for my portable radio and glanced over the hood of the vehicle, Rodriguez closed the door quickly. I immediately reached out for the driver's door window frame and was able to slightly grab a hold of it. Rodriguez placed his hand on the door from the interior and pushed his left side of the body against the door. I believe that Rodriguez was at this time trying to strike me with the door of the vehicle. I, however, stepped back slightly and immediately ordered Rodriguez to turn off the vehicle. Rodriguez refused. I then observed that Rodriguez's right hand was reaching. His right hand was reaching into the small area between the driver's seat and the center console. At this moment, I completely lost sight of his hand. I observed a look of desperation on Rodriguez's face as he was desperately reaching and searching rapidly for something between the driver's seat and the center console. Rodriguez then began to rev his engine and said, "No, pues no." I believe that Rodriguez was attempting to flee from my lawful traffic stop. However, I believe that Rodriguez did not have his vehicle in the drive gear and was unable to move at the moment. I then ordered Rodriguez to get out of the car in Spanish. Rodriguez then looked directly at me and looked directly at my duty weapon. Rodriguez refused and said, "Pues nombre." Rodriguez with his right hand then quickly opened the center console of his vehicle. Rodriguez placed his hand inside the center. Once Rodriguez placed his hand inside the center console, my line of sight was completely blocked of Rodriguez's right hand. I immediately unholstered my duty-issued 6R P226, and as I was in the process of actively targeting the suspect, Rodriguez then began to pull out an object that was long and dull gray color. I believe I screamed at Rodriguez. However, before I was able to give a complete order again, Rodriguez pulled his right hand from across his chest in my direction, also cocking his head backwards towards my direction. My vision focused directly on the gray object and Rodriguez's right hand. I immediately bladed my body off towards Rodriguez in a defensive position. My left hand had now moved from the door handle to my duty weapon. Rodriguez brought his hand from the center console towards his left shoulder in my direction. Rodriguez's movement was so rapid that I was only able to focus on a blur of his tattoo from the top of his right hand and a gray object in his hand. It was at this moment that I believed that Rodriguez was about to use a deadly weapon against me. I believed that my life was in immediate danger, and I was terrified that my life was about to come to an end. I'm sorry. I reasonably believed that it was immediately necessary to stop Rodriguez from using any type of weapon against me. I believed that Rodriguez had a weapon in his hand and was going to use deadly force in order to prevent him from being placed under arrest. I feared for my life and safety at this moment. Due to the totality of the circumstances and all of Rodriguez's actions, I then fired 4 shots at Rodriguez. As the second or third shot was being fired, Rodriguez placed his vehicle in drive and began to accelerate away from this officer at a high rate of speed. I believe that Rodriguez was still a threat to this officer and the community, especially since he drove away recklessly and erratically at a high rate of speed. I even heard the sound of his tires screeching as Rodriguez sped off. I then began to advise communications network that there were shots fired and took a few steps towards Rodriguez's vehicle. However, I quickly noticed that Rodriguez was again intentionally evading detention on a motor vehicle from this officer. I then ran back to my marked patrol unit and began to pursue Rodriguez again. Rodriguez drove down East University Boulevard and stopped his vehicle near the exit of Veterans Plaza about half a block away. I then placed my police unit behind the suspect's vehicle and again exited my police unit in order to approach Rodriguez again. As I exited my police unit, I had my police-issued 6-hard duty weapon drawn and was actively targeting Rodriguez. As I was approaching the driver's side, I observed that Rodriguez was moving around in the driver's seat. And then it appeared that Rodriguez's vehicle moved backwards rapidly and crashed into the front end of my police unit. I believe that Rodriguez was at this time intentionally trying to cause further harm to this officer by using his vehicle to intentionally strike the police unit. However, since I had immediately exited my police unit, upon stopping, I was already walking up to Rodriguez. When Rodriguez struck the front end of the police unit, I was again in fear for my life and safety, since Rodriguez was still attempting to leave location, even if it meant crashing into a police unit, and I was unable to see his hands at the moment. As I was walking towards the driver's side door, I observed that Rodriguez was still moving his right hand around in the center of the vehicle out of my view. I then, while actively targeting Rodriguez, commanded him to put the vehicle in park multiple times. Rodriguez, however, refused and shook his head from side to side. I then advised communications network to send EMS, emergency medical services, to the location because there was a subject shot. I then noticed that Rodriguez finally placed his hands in front of him with his palms open in an upward position. I then quickly reached into the vehicle with my left hand and turned the key in the ignition backwards to turn the vehicle off, while still actively targeting Rodriguez with my duty weapon in my right hand. I then took a step back and attempted to scan the area around me due to the second suspect still at large, and I was fearful that he could come back to return to attempt to cause harm to this officer. I at this time believed that it was immediately necessary to apprehend the second suspect because he could also pose a threat to the community. I then continued to keep Rodriguez actively targeted until a backup officer arrived on scene in order to assist me with safely apprehending Rodriguez. After a few moments, Sergeant Avitia 128 arrived on scene along with Officer J. Alejandro 5059 and Officer A. Ortiz 3133. Sergeant Avitia exited his marked patrol unit and asked me what had happened while walking up to the driver's side of the vehicle. I then advised that Rodriguez was not cuffed, and he provided cover as Officer Ortiz 3133 pulled Rodriguez out of the driver's seat and placed him on the ground. I then immediately placed hand restraints on Rodriguez and began to pat him down for any weapons. I then found Rodriguez's wallet and removed his Texas identification card in order for me to identify this individual properly. I then observed that there was a silver tool right next to the driver's side seat and a large screwdriver in the center console that was partially out. I also observed that there was multiple cases of Bud Light beer in the passenger side of the vehicle. I then walked away from the scene and advised Sergeant Avitia of the situation. When crime scene investigator J. Hernandez 2722 had arrived on scene, I notified him briefly of what had occurred as well. I then, along with investigator Hernandez, walked over to the initial stopping position, and I advised him that the shots had been fired from this general area. I also advised him that the suspect vehicle had crashed into the police unit further down the road after Rodriguez evaded on a motor vehicle the second time. I then walked back over to crime scene police unit and was photographed by investigator Hernandez. I then handed investigator Hernandez my duty weapon and 2 of my magazines that were on my duty belt over to him. At this time, Sergeant K. Hines 3502 was at location and advised me that he was going to escort me back to the police station. I then left my property inside of Delta 134 and drove over to the police station with Sergeant Hines. I was later advised that the second suspect, Jaime Gomez, date of birth 8/8 of 92, had been apprehended and was also going to be placed under arrest and booked accordingly for a warrant in reference to an aggravated robbery. No further action was taken by this officer at this time.
Okay.